The episode began like any other Friday night, burying the audience in a false sense of security. The arena lights were dim, the crowd's energy was simmering but restless, waiting for a spark that seemed unlikely to come. In the center of the ring, the self-proclaimed ruler of the brand stood with a microphone, listing accomplishments that the fans had heard 1,000 times before. It was a monologue of arrogance, designed to suffocate hope. The commentary team spoke in hushed, resigned tones, accepting that this dominance was the permanent reality of the industry. The air felt stale. The villains were winning, the heroes were broken, and the show felt like it was drifting toward a predictable, fading black screen. Then, the anomaly happened. It wasn't a pyro explosion or a sudden blackout that signaled the shift, it was a sound. A single, distinct, distorted guitar riff that hadn't been heard on this broadcast in nearly a decade. For exactly 1 second, the entire arena went dead silent. It was a vacuum of disbelief. The brain needed that split second to process if the audio truck had made a mistake, or if reality was actually bending. The man in the ring stopped mid-sentence, his eyes darting to the entrance ramp, his mask of invincibility cracking just enough to reveal genuine confusion. The camera operators didn't even pan immediately. They froze, caught in the same paralysis as the 20,000 people in the stands. That singular second of silence was heavier than any cheer. It was the collective gasp of a world realizing that the impossible was no longer impossible. The atmosphere didn't just change, it evaporated, replaced instantly by a static charge of pure, unadulterated shock that made the hair on every arm stand up. The walk of the ghost, the explosion of noise that followed, was not a cheer. It was a primal roar, a sonic wall that shook the camera lenses visibly. Through the curtain stepped a figure that felt like a ghost walking into the living world. He didn't run. He didn't play to the crowd. He simply walked with a terrifying, calm purpose. The commentary team dissolved into chaos. Could hear the headset audio peaking. The sheer lack of professionalism as they reverted to being fans, witnessing a miracle. This cannot be happening. "Do your eyes see what mine see?" one shouted, his voice cracking under the strain of the moment. The visuals were surreal. The returning legend looked older, weathered by time, but the aura was denser, heavier. Every step down the ramp felt like a drumbeat of war. The fans in the front row were clutching their heads, mouths agape, some holding back tears of nostalgia, others screaming unintelligible prayers to the wrestling gods. This wasn't just a wrestler returning. It was the return of a memory, a specific era of feelings crashing into the modern day. The security guards turned their heads, breaking protocol just to catch a glimpse of the history walking past them. He paused at the steel steps, looking out at the sea of handmade signs and blinding flashbulbs. He didn't smile. This wasn't a reunion tour. This was business. The commentary noted the look in his eyes, a mixture of regret and violence. He looked like a man who had tried to stay away, who had tried to leave the violence behind, but was pulled back by a gravity he couldn't resist. He wiped his boots on the apron, a ritual seen 1,000 times, but tonight it felt like he was wiping away the last 10 years of absence. The stare that stopped time. He entered the ring, and the music cut. This is the moment where television usually fails to capture the magnitude of the room, but tonight, the silence told the story. The two men stood across from each other, the current king and the returning emperor. No punches were thrown, no words were exchanged. They simply stood 10 feet apart, letting the gravity of the situation settle over the building. The tension was thick enough to choke on. The crowd, sensing the volatility, quieted down to a low, buzzing hum, terrified that making too much noise would break the spell. The camera zoomed in on their faces. On one side, the arrogance of the current champion was melting into defensiveness. His posture shifted, his shoulders tightened. He was no longer the predator. He was the threatened alpha. On the other side, the returnee stood perfectly still. His breathing was slow, controlled, almost predatory. The commentary team whispered now, afraid to interrupt the visual storytelling. "Generations are colliding right in front of us," they murmured. "This is the moment we thought we'd never see." It was a study in body language. The champion shifted his weight, a subtle sign of discomfort. The legend didn't blink. He just stared, dissecting his opponent, stripping away the hype and the accolades with a look of utter disappointment.
Act!
It was a masterclass, and less is more. They didn't need to touch to convince the world this was a fight for the soul of the company. The legacy of the past was judging the reality of the present, and the verdict was clearly visible on his face. You are not enough. The standoff stretched for what felt like minutes, holding millions of viewers hostage in sheer anticipation. The collapse of order. The first strike wasn't a punch, it was a sentence. The legend raised the microphone, and the building shook with anticipation. But he didn't speak a catchphrase, spoke a truth that cut through the champion's character like a knife. The reaction was instant. The champion lunged, abandoning his composure, desperate to silence the ghost. The brawl that ensued was ugly, frantic, and unmistakably real. It wasn't a choreographed dance. It was a scramble for dominance. They tumbled through the ropes, crashing onto the announcer's table, sending monitors and water bottles flying. The referees swarmed from the back, a sea of black and white trying to separate two forces of nature. But they were tossed aside like children. Backstage, the illusion of the show broke down. Cameras caught glimpses of other wrestlers stepping out of the locker rooms, standing in the hallways watching the monitors with genuine awe. The script had been burned. The timeline had shifted. Social media began to melt down, trending #1 globally within seconds. The commentary team had abandoned their desks, standing up to call the action from a safe distance, screaming about the carnage. "He's not here to talk. He's here to burn it down," shouted the play-by-play announcer. The champion was left lying in the wreckage of the timekeeper's area, looking up with a mix of physical pain and existential dread. The returning legend stood over him, chest heaving, shirt torn, looking at his own hands as if surprised by the violence he was still capable of. It was chaos, pure and simple, but it was the kind of chaos that builds empires. Security finally managed to form a wall between them, but the damage was done. The hierarchy had been shattered. The twist and the reflection. As the show went off the air, the camera lingered on the legend's face, but the expression wasn't triumph, it was sorrow. And this is where the true story lies. We often view these returns as moments of victory, of the hero coming home to save the day. But as he walked back up the ramp, looking back at the wreckage he created, the realization hit the audience. He wasn't back to save the show. He was back because he had nowhere else to go. The glory of the past is a heavy chain. The twist wasn't that he returned. The twist was that he realized he never truly left. The commentary offered a final, somber reflection as the screen faded to black. "Be careful what you wish for," they whispered. "The past doesn't return to save the future. It returns to consume it." The viral clips would show the cheers and the punches, but the story told in that final gaze was a tragedy. He had returned to the only place that made sense to him, only to find that time had moved on. And to reclaim his spot, he had to destroy the very future he helped build. The screen went dark, leaving the audience not with a sense of resolution, but with a complex question about legacy. Was this a rescue mission, or was it an ego desperate to remain relevant? The lights went out, but the conversation had just begun. The frozen moment was over, but the thaw would bring a flood that would drown the entire landscape of the industry. The king had returned, but the kingdom might not survive him.